Welcome to the Saddleback College Emeritus Institute Dorothy Marie Lowry Distinguished Guest Lecture Series, recorded in spring 2020. Thanks also to our faculty moderator, Mrs. Laura Hoffman. For more information regarding the Emeritus Institute, please visit our website at www.saddleback.edu/emeritus.
Welcome back, everyone. I have the great pleasure today of introducing David Plouffe, who is an art historian, a colleague. We teach together at a number of schools. He is a much sought after professor and one of the greatest lecturers. Sorry to spoil the surprise, but you'll soon find out, on art history. So today we bring David Plouffe's talk on art theft, looting, and repatriation. And here's a little bit more about Dave. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in art history from the University of Laverne and completed his Master of Arts degree in art history from Cal State Fullerton. And then since graduation, Dave has been a faculty member of Cal State Fullerton, University of Laverne, and Chaffey College, and more. Dave has taught a variety of courses, including art appreciation, art and civilization, survey 1 and 2, contemporary art, and the history of modern art. For over 12 years, Dave has been lecturing on a number of topics in art history, from prehistoric cave art to abstract expressionism. Prior to teaching, Dave worked as collections administrator in the Department of Costume and Textiles for the LA County Museum of Art. There he contributed to the exhibition, Breaking the Mode, Contemporary Fashion from the Permanent Collection, which traveled to the Fondazione Palazzo Strozzi in Florence, Italy, and the Indianapolis Museum of Art. Dave's current research interest explores issues on art theft, looting, and repatriation. So that's what we're going to hear today. His current writing projects include an article on the portrayal of art and artists in the stories of 20th century horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, and an introductory textbook for art appreciation courses. He is the author of Art Appreciation, an introduction to the formal elements and mediums, published by Cognella Academic Press. And here I want to give Dave Plouffe a warm welcome.
Thank you, Laura, for that very nice introduction. And hello to everyone. I am going to speak today on art theft, looting, and repatriation. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss. And I thought first, with everything that's in the news, that we've had a recent theft of a Van Gogh painting not even a week ago, back on March 30th. Some thieves broke into the Singer Loren Museum in Amsterdam and stole this painting, The Parsonage Garden at Noonan, in spring of 1884. And this is one of Van Gogh's early works, early in his career. And you can kind of tell these works that he does in Amsterdam as they're kind of very dark and monochromatic. But Van Gogh is one of those individuals that we all know of and we all appreciate his art. And of course, it's on the top of the list for art thieves. Back in 2002, thieves stole paintings from the Van Gogh Museum itself in Amsterdam. They had a ladder, placed it against the building, climbed on top of the roof, and broke in through a skylight. They stole two paintings. This one here, the Reformed Church at Noonan. And I was also upset when they stole this one. This is one of my favorite paintings. It's the view of the sea at Scheveningen. And Van Gogh painted this work, what we would call on plein air, which means that he was out in the open air on the bluff overlooking this ocean. And you can see these dark storm clouds rolling in, how choppy the sea is. And you can imagine the wind kicking up sand particles on the beach. And that's exactly what happens, because when this painting was x-rayed back in 1990, and a lot of these paintings were by Van Gogh because that was the 100th anniversary of his death. So there was a lot of exhibitions and retrospectives of his works. When they x-rayed this one, they found sand particles had been embedded into the oil paint that Van Gogh had used. And that had always been one of my favorite things, kind of like a time capsule from that very day. The thieves, luckily, they were caught, convicted, and they're still spending time in jail, so you can go and say hi to them if you'd like. The paintings, they were gone for 14 years. And fortunately, about 3.5 years ago, they were recovered in a garage of a person who had connections to organized crime. And here is an image of the paintings being returned to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. But that kind of got me to thinking about, where does art truly belong? Does it belong in the original location, such as Amsterdam for Van Gogh's paintings? Does it belong in the country of origin? But sometimes there's issues with that. We have countries that have political turmoil, subject to environmental conditions. The culture may not exist anymore. You know, we find a lot of Roman works in Turkey today, and should they remain in Turkey, or should they be repatriated to Italy, where the Roman culture may or may not exist, since we're talking about the ancient Romans? And we're mostly concerned with damage and destruction. It's one thing to sell an artwork, but it's another thing to absolutely destroy it. And that's one of the biggest issues we have today with factions such as ISIS. What you see being cut up here is one of the Lamassu sculptures. And there's only 3 areas, 3 cities in the world today where these remain in their original location. The ones at Nineveh have now been destroyed, and we're not even sure about this second city where these have rested. Or should art be in museums? In museums, they can be exhibited, they can be preserved, they can be protected, and they can also be accessible to the masses. Look at all the people here at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and at the LA County Museum of Art here locally. We have crowds that are in France at the Louvre, and also up in England at the British Museum. And as a society, we crave art, and artworks really become commodities. Because when we're at a museum, have you ever stopped to wonder why that in Germany we'll see the famed bust of Nefertiti when it should really be in Egypt? Or when we go and visit the British Museum in England and we see the Elgin marbles, which really should be in Greece. So how do artworks arrive at these museums? Well, for a lot of times, it's just the exact topic of our discussion. It's art theft and looting. And a lot of countries such as Greece are asking for works such as the Elgin marbles to be repatriated. But art theft and looting is not anything new to our society. When we look at the pyramids at Giza, they were looted millennia ago. The obelisk from Heliopolis that you see here in front of St. Peter's Cathedral, you know, this is brought to Rome by the Emperor Caligula around 37 AD. And Pope Sixtus V brought this to the Vatican. And then we have the horses on top of the Basilica San Marco in Venice. These were looted during the Fourth Crusade around the year 1200. And if we return these, do they go back to Constantinople, where they were looted from, which you see the image of the Hagia Sophia in the bottom left-hand corner? Or are they going to be repatriated to the Arch of Trajan, which you see at the right? which is where they originally were. So why has stealing or looting art become so popular? And this is where I love to ask my audience, because we play a little family feud. I have the top 4 answers, and everyone, of course, screams out money, and that's absolutely true. Money is probably the most important factor when it comes to stealing art. When we look at Christie's auctions, for instance, it is amazing how much these paintings sell for. This is a work called Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci, and it was sold in October 2016. It sold for $400 million. And when you add the auction fees on top of that, you can add another $50 million to that total. Besides money, we also have ease. And having worked at a museum, I hate to tell you, it's fairly easy to steal art. I know that when we plan to go to a museum, we think that security guards look like this. When we start walking around, we realize they kind of look like this. So art theft is fairly easy to do because museums are just like any other business. They're understaffed, they're undersupervised, and unfortunately, they're underprotected. I think in America, though, we do have an advantage. In Europe, a lot of art is in summer houses that are on tour, and the security there is anything but perfect. The size and shape of artworks also make stealing art conducive to stealing. We can cut a painting from its frame, roll it up, stick it into a backpack or under a coat. These thieves are taking artworks right out to their Audi and escaping. Besides the size and shape, we also have enforcement. How many people are actually out there looking for lost and stolen art? Were you aware that the LAPD has an art theft detail? When I first started studying art theft back in 2008, I called them up and I asked them how many people staff this department. The person responded on the phone, "You're talking to him." There was only one person. In 2016, I redid this lecture and I called them up again and I asked the person how many people staffed the department now, and he was excited to tell me that they had doubled in size. So the LAPD has 2 people in their art theft division. But luckily, we also have other entities helping us find lost and stolen art. Interpol, the International Police Agency, currently working on a list of 25,000 artworks. And that is more than enough to fill any museum. We also have the Art Loss Register, which is a permanent database that art goes into if it's lost, missing, or stolen. It is something that auction houses are required to search before they put up an object for sale. They currently get about 1 hit for every 11,000 objects searched. But even though that seems like a very low number, it really isn't. The Art Loss Register has been responsible for returning hundreds of items to their original owners and the original cultures to which they belong. What really struck me when studying art theft is I found out that it is the 3rd highest grossing criminal activity behind drugs and weapons. I figured drugs and weapons would be 1st and 2nd, but I didn't think art theft would be 3rd. Sadly, only about 10% of art is ever recovered, and traffickers, they receive about 10 cents on the dollar for the art's value. I'm going to start talking about art theft in terms of times of war, because with war raging around, it just makes art theft all that much easier. Now, this is the Iraqi Museum in Baghdad. And in spring of 2003, it was looted. Within moments, tons of ancient artifacts quickly became souvenirs. This is a museum that held, really the basis of humanity. This is from the cradle of civilization, and these objects end up disappearing or vanishing into thin air. This is exactly what happened to the famed Warwick vase, or sometimes it's called the Uruk vase. And this is important to us because it's one of the first objects that show a narrative in art history. There was a time period where you could return these works, an amnesty period for about a year, and you could return these works without any prosecution or penalty. The work of Ace was returned, but it was returned in a box that had been broken into more than a dozen pieces. But this is only the latest in a long line of looting during times of war. One of the greatest art thieves of all time was Napoleon. Between 1796 and 1815, he and his armies ravaged not only Europe, but also North Africa, stealing art from Egypt, Austria, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and most importantly, Italy. But I'm actually going to start off talking about Egypt. It's because of Napoleon that we have the Rosetta Stone. He and his army are the ones who found it. And of course, this is the key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics. On his campaign in Egypt, Napoleon not only brought along 38,000 soldiers with him, but also 167 what he called intellectuals. These are painters, engineers, botanists, mathematicians, and historians. The Rosetta Stone was found in Rosetta, Egypt, July 15th, 1799. Later on, though, Napoleon's going to be defeated by the British and Ottomans. And on Napoleon's defeat, the Rosetta Stone becomes property of the British under the terms of the Treaty of Alexandria. And today you can see it in the British Museum. When we moved to Italy, this individual stole over 500 works of art from the Vatican. And I think that makes it sure that he did not make it to heaven. Among the most famous sculptures that he stole was this one. This is called Laocoon and His Sons. And Laocoon is the priest who tries to warn the people of Troy it's probably not a good idea to bring that wooden horse inside the gates. In fact, his famous quote is, "What deadly fraud is this?" However, the god Poseidon sends out a serpent to prevent this from happening. And we have this incredibly dynamic scene of these three bodies writhing in agony as the serpent intertwines around them. Napoleon was so pleased with this capture that he paraded it with other war treasures down the streets of Paris, and then commissioned a set of china to commemorate the event. And when we turn the scene slightly clockwise, we see that not only did Napoleon steal the Laocoon sculpture, but he also stole another famed sculpture called the Apollo Belvedere. Napoleon's philosophy about art is that he wanted to build an appreciation in French society of foreign artists and civilizations. He felt that art could open our eyes to other cultures, and in a way, he kind of justifies his stealing. However, when we fast forward about another 130 years, we have another military leader who is someone who thinks the exact opposite, that instead of art opening our eyes to other cultures, it could also close them. And of course, I'm speaking about Adolf Hitler. This is a person who attended opera, theater, and musical recitals. He had been an art student as well, studying painting, sculpture, and architecture, applying twice to the Arts Academy at Vienna, but being turned down. And this is one of his paintings. Now, these paintings are never going to be shown in a museum or in any exhibit during our lifetime or our kids' lifetimes. But perhaps sometime in the future, hundreds of years from now, when the collective memory of World War II has disappeared, these will be removed from the deepest, darkest vaults that they see that they're in museums. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, besides being mass murderers, they would also be the most infamous of art thieves. They would steal everything. After his appreciation of Germanic art and artists, Hitler was very much a classicist. And when we see these buildings being constructed for the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, and this is Zeppelin Field here on the screen, they're all done in the Greco-Roman style. And when we look throughout the history of art, not only do we have the classical age of the Greeks and Romans, but we also have another high point at the Renaissance, when artists like Donatello and Michelangelo look back to the classical age and bring many of these techniques forward. So Hitler is very much into classical art and Renaissance art. But even more important to note is that he absolutely hated modern art. He would call over 1,400 artists degenerate, which means that they lost the physical, mental, or moral qualities considered to be normal and desirable. This art showed evidence of decline. And these are works by Impressionists, Cubists, Expressionists, Surrealists, and Dadaists. He hated these people the most. He called them, quote, insane and depraved humans. The people who completed these works are some of the most famed artists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Artists like Camille Pissarro and Edward Munch, Kandinsky and Modigliani, Chagall, Braque, and even our friend Pablo Picasso, all labeled as degenerate artists. And no one was free or could escape Hitler's wrath when it came to modern art. This is a work that is commonly seen in art history books. It's called Prophet. It is by the artist Emil Nold. But what the history books fail to tell you is that Emil Nold happened to be a fervent member of the Nazi Party. Yet in the 1930s, he was told to stop practicing art because he was an expressionist. Others, such as Paul Klee, a teacher at the Bauhaus, was removed from his teaching post. And I want to talk a little bit about what the Bauhaus is, because it is really important in the history and evolution of art. This is a school that first opened in Germany in 1919. And this school considered all facets of art to be of equal importance. It didn't matter if you were a painter or a sculptor, an architect, a graphic designer, or a ceramicist. All art had an equal playing field. It was also the first time we have a school that teaches non-traditional concepts. This is a school of avant-garde art. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, one of the first things he did was close this school. He called it, quote, un-German. And so this is the most famed location of the Bauhaus. There were actually 4 different locations of the school. This was the last one, built by Walter Gropius, who was also the administrator of this school. After the school was closed, it became a Nazi party headquarters. Here's an image of the classrooms. And this is where you have not only famous students, but famous teachers that we're going to see and know about in the history of art. People like Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who's famed for photography and graphic design. Joseph and Annie Albers, who were both students and then became professors at the Bauhaus. Again, noted for graphic design, and Annie, of course, for her textiles. Oskar Schliemer, he was a sculptor and also ran the Bauhaus theater troupe. Marcel Breuer, who was famous for steel chairs. And Nam Gabo, he was one of the last people to leave the Bauhaus. Literally, as he was walking out of his studio door, there were stormtroopers coming in the entrance to the Bauhaus. And he's famous for these nylon works that are wrapped, they're wrapped in nylon. The form of them is made from lucite. In 1937, Hitler is going to sign the Degenerate Art Act, which allows the Nazi Party to go through Germany's state museums to quote unquote cleanse them of works that Hitler deemed as poisonous. Museums were ordered to relinquish their collections. They did not have a choice. And within a period of 2 weeks, Nazi troops had taken 16,000 artworks to Switzerland, and they were sold at auction. These works included this self-portrait by the German artist Kirchner, and this painting by Van Gogh. It's one of his self-portraits. And this work sold at that auction for $40,000. All the funds, of course, benefiting the Third Reich. This painting was also purchased at that auction by Joseph Pulitzer Jr. After the war, he would donate this to the St. Louis Museum of Art. He told his friends he wanted to protect this painting from an uncertain future. And it was a good thing that he did purchase it. Out of the 16,000 paintings and artworks taken to this auction, only 11,000 of them were sold. The other 5,000 of them, they were destroyed. And this is only step one in Hitler's plan, and kind of like Napoleon, it doesn't sound that bad at first, right? He wants to rid the world of bad art. I don't want to see bad art, but I also don't want this person to be the one to censor what is good and what is bad art. The second step is just as nefarious. It's to collect Europe's finest art treasures. And that's how they got a hold of this painting here. This is the portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer. It's done by the famed Austrian artist Gustav Klimt. And Klimt is incredibly famous. He's Austrian's #1 painter. And this has even been referred to as the Austrian Mona Lisa. It's a unique painting. It's about 4 feet square. Adela Bloch-Bauer off to the right, and the pattern is very much in the Art Nouveau style. It's painted in 1909, and she's going to pass away in 1925. The ownership of this painting transfers to her husband, Ferdinand, who at the outbreak of World War II, and in fact, right after Austria is annexed to Germany, in 1938, he leaves Austria for Switzerland, and he's going to die in exile. And the Nazis get a hold of this painting and 4 others owned by the Bloch-Bauers. All of these, again, done by Gustav Klimt. And after the war is over, and according to Adela's will, she wanted these given back to the Austrian National Museum. And that's where they've been placed for the last 50 to 60 years. But in the early 2000s, the family has fought for these to come back to them. And I was working at the LA County Museum of Art when these were on display there. And we had just finished the King Tut exhibition. So this is probably 2005, 2006. And with the King Tut exhibition, you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of objects, heightened security, long lines. And then our next great exhibit is 5 paintings. And I couldn't wrap my head around it that people would be so excited to see these 5 works. But on the opening day of the exhibition, I walked downstairs and I saw that the line for this exhibition was 2 hours long. And it was at that point that I knew that these were so incredibly important. And I ended up being able to see them a couple weeks later and stand in a room in front of these paintings. And what happens to them is a very unique story. In 2007, the courts give these paintings back to the family in an unprecedented court case. And I want to show you in a video now what happens to these paintings. And this lady here, this is Maria Altman. She is the one spearheading the court case. She is the niece of Adela Bloch-Bauer. So I am now going to play the video for you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Christie's, and it's our privilege to have you here on what for us is a very special evening. And it's my real privilege to introduce to you a very special lady, and I choose my terms carefully, Maria Altman, who is the niece of the late Ferdinand and Adela Bloch-Bauer.
You wanted them to remain in public collections.
Exactly.
Why are you selling it to perhaps private collectors?
I'm not the only one. I have 4 co-heirs, and we would very much like to see the paintings for the rest of the time in public view. So our hope will be that there will be museums that will acquire them.
51, the Klimts, birch trees, $28 million. Against you, madam, at 28, 29 million with Ken now. At 30 million, Yossi's bidder, at $32 million. 33 million at $36 million, all done and selling right at $36 million. Mark, your bidder at 36 million. 1728, thank you. Lot 52, second Klimt. Attersee landscape there, lot 52, in this case, $10 million starts it. Still up front against you here and selling this time, all done at 28 million. For you, madam, $28 million. Third Klimt, apple tree number 1, showing on the screen again, far right, 1912, showing here and as illustrated there in your catalogues. $24,500,000. 25 million. 25 million with Thomas now. 29 million 5. Selling this side for 29 million 5. Well, 54 for Klimt there, portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer 2, showing again on the screen far right and as illustrated in your catalogue, the 1912 portrait. And in this case, $25 million starts it at 25 million now. 57,500,000. It's better at 58 million. 4,500,000. 65 million. 78,500,000 on this telephone. Fair warning. Guy, your bidder at $78 million. 500. I think it's probably fair to say they were all anonymously bought, but my assumption is they went to individuals.
Now, I don't have auction footage of this painting, but it sold for $135 million. And in 2007, this was the most amount of money anyone has ever paid for a work of art. It was purchased by Ron Lauder, who is a member of the Estee Lauder family. And for a while, he had this hanging in his living room. We also saw this painting sell at that auction for $78 million. And I'd ask you to think about who would be the person who would buy this, because unfortunately, it's out of the pocketbook of most museums. And what we see is people such as celebrities like Oprah who are buying these works. And Oprah will turn around several years later and sell this painting, literally doubling her money, selling this painting for $150 million. And I know that this really bothered me personally, having seen all of these together in an exhibition and knowing that they were on public display, the family fighting for them back because they say this is our family's heritage, but then turning around and selling them for $300 million at auction. But celebrities are big resources when it comes to purchasing art. People like Barbra Streisand and Jack Nicholson, Bruce Willis, Cheech Marin, and Vincent Price were all heavy-duty art collectors. I know when I worked at the LA County Museum of Art, we actually stored some of Barbra Streisand's works at the museum, and we would bring them to her mansion when she would throw parties there. But I want to go back to World War II. Now that we've talked a little bit about Austria, other countries are going to fall to Germany, such as Poland and the Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, and most importantly, when it comes to art, France. In the summer of 1939, museum administrators give the call to evacuate the Louvre. For the first time ever, this is happening, where century-old paintings are being taken off of the walls and removed from their frames, being packaged up into boxes, and the Louvre ceases to become a museum, but instead it becomes more of a warehouse. These paintings are moved in very chaotic conditions, and I can tell you, as someone who has handled artwork such as paintings like this, it just gives you chills to think that these are basically could be easily damaged being moved this way. A lot of these are taken out on trucks, driven out to destinations in the French countryside. When we take a look at this painting, we've got about 4 or 5 people handling it, and this is an absolutely gigantic painting. I'm going to flip it around here, and this is a painting by Rubens. It's called Maria de Medici Arriving at Marseille, and this is when Maria de Medici, who had been married to the King of France, he passes away and she decides to serve as regent. She commissions Rubens to paint a series of these works, and there's about 25 in this series, of a way to legitimize her ascent to the throne, even though she's Italian. Even the great Victory of Samothrace had to be moved, and this is a sculpture that sits atop the grand staircase in the Louvre. And I know a lot of people think that this is just maybe one piece of sculpture, that the head is just missing. However, it's not. It is literally hundreds of pieces that have been glued back together. And even the curator of sculpture at the Louvre did not think she would hold together, moving her down this ramp to a storage box. But fortunately, she did. And even the Mona Lisa, she escapes in her own climate-controlled ambulance, driven off to the streets of Paris to undisclosed locations. In fact, there is no official documentation to what happens to this painting between August 28th, 1939, and the day she's put back onto the wall of the Louvre, June 16th, 1945. But the Germans were extremely smart, and they could root out these hiding places. And when these paintings and artworks were found, they were put on trains, sent back to Berlin, set aside for either Hitler himself, which is what he would have taken this painting here. This was actually one of Hitler's most favorite paintings. He even had a picture of it in his office. This is called The Astronomer by Vermeer. If he didn't want a painting, it would then pass to his first rung of generals, such as Goering and Goebel. And then the paintings that they didn't want would be set aside for the Führer Museum, which was being built in his home city of Linz, Austria. I also put this sculpture in this presentation here because this is a unique work. It's by Michelangelo. It's called The Bruges Madonna and Child. It is a work that not only did Napoleon steal it, but also Hitler. So both individuals that I'm talking about in this presentation stole this work. After France, we looked to Poland at having the largest art collection in Europe. And this is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. It's The Lady with an Ermine. And it is not a very large painting. In fact, here it is here being held by these Allied soldiers. This painting was taken to a summer house in Poland and walled up in a basement. The Nazis saw the comings and goings of workmen, and they broke into the house, tore down the newly constructed wall that was not only hiding the painting, but also hiding a lot of gold artifacts. They tossed the painting aside, took all of the gold, even stepped on this painting. When it was recovered, there was a boot print on its surface. Another painting that was in Poland was this one. This is a self-portrait of Raphael. It is one of 3 known that he did. Common name for it is just called Portrait of a Young Man. But it is the most important painting still missing from World War II. There are 100,000 artworks still missing from that war. This painting was last seen in the Nazi governor of Poland's possession in January of 1945. That's the last time it was seen. However, in 2012, the art newspaper ran this story that we had finally found it, that it was in a bank vault, undisclosed location, more information to follow. However, 2 weeks later, this was found out to be a hoax. So this painting is still missing. And it really becomes a game of hide and seek, finding these artworks. The Germans thought that they would be back for them, and so they would hide them. One of the hiding places here in the Bavarian Alps is the Castle Neuschwanstein, which when it was found, it was just packed floor to ceiling with artworks. And when you think about all the artworks that were taken by the Nazis in today's dollars, it comes out to about $28 billion worth of art. Besides castles, the Nazis also hid art in salt mines, primarily in Austria. And these are some works being recovered from just one of those salt mines, buried a mile in the ground. And they were set up with just a warehouse features. It took something like 80 train cart loads to empty this out. The person that you see in the bottom image, that is Dean Keller. And he led the monuments men throughout Europe, and particularly in Italy. This was an allied group of individuals that were tasked with preserving art during the war. I'm going to show you a few pictures of the works recovered in the salt mines, and there's General Eisenhower. This photograph is one of my favorites because it shows the recovering of the Ghent altarpiece. The soldiers are looking at the bottom center panel, which is the mystic lamb. Behind them, we have an image of Eve and also some angels as well. This is the Ghent altarpiece, and it's very unique. It's 11.5 feet in height. It is 15 feet wide. It weighs over a ton, yet it's the most frequently stolen work of art ever produced. In its 600-year existence, it's been stolen 13 times. The last time in 1937 by Hitler and the Nazi Party. The panel that you see in the lower left-hand side with the horse in the front, that is a replica. All the panels have been recovered except for that lower left one. We have no idea where it is today. So I kind of want to move away from talking about World War II, and I want to look at some individual art thieves. For instance, Thomas Bruce, who is better known as Lord Elgin, and I think he was the 7th Lord Elgin. He was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. In Greece in 1801, he obtains permission from the Ottoman authorities to purchase about half of the surviving sculptures off of the Parthenon. And of course, the Parthenon is the very first temple that was put on to the Acropolis. It was dedicated to the goddess Athena Parthenos. And these sculptures that we're talking about would have been up on the pediments of this temple, which is kind of that triangular area that you see at the roof line. And so when we look at the Elgin marbles, that's why they have this slant to them. They are considered the most valuable and important works of classical antiquity. Of course, the Ottoman Empire falls in Greece in 1822, and Greece asks for these works back from the British Museum, and the British Museum says, absolutely not. We bought these fair and square. And this is one of the most actively discussed and argued points of art theft. Should these be brought back to Greece, or should they remain in the British Museum? Even in 2013, Greece opened up the Acropolis Museum and has left space for these works to be returned. But the British Museum still refuses, saying if they repatriate these works, they're going to have to repatriate tons of other objects, including these bronze plaques. In the 1850s, there was the royal house in Nigeria, which at the time the country was Benin, was looted. And 3,000 of these brass plaques were stolen that day. But 200 of them have found their way into the archives of the British Museum. Adam Worth. This gentleman was a head of a criminal syndicate in London during the Victorian age. His brother John had been imprisoned, and so Adam decided he needed a bargaining chip to spring his brother out of jail. So on a Monday night in May of 1876, he and his bodyguards go over to Thomas Agnew and Sons auction house. The bodyguards lift this gentleman up through an open window, and in the darkness, he finds this painting. This is called The Duchess of Devonshire. It's by the artist Gainsborough. He cuts the painting from its frame, and they take off with it into the night. His brother John, he gets out of jail by totally legal means. And instead of returning the painting, Adam Worth decides to hold on to it, saying he's entranced with her beauty. Probably one of the most notorious art thieves, or at least art capers, is by Vincenzo Peruggia, who was a carpenter, and he worked for the Louvre. On a Monday morning in August of 1911, he steps out of a storage closet where he had been hiding overnight, and he walks over to the wall and steals what will be the most famous painting of all time. This is a person who steals the Mona Lisa. And he's able to keep it for 2 years. He's caught in 1913 trying to sell it to an undercover police officer. At his trial, he says that he's just an Italian expatriate trying to return all the stolen works that Napoleon stole back to, and return those back to Italy. But as far as the Mona Lisa is concerned, this was never stolen by Napoleon. It was actually sold to the King of France by Da Vinci himself. And Da Vinci's going to then go and live in the court of Francis I for the last 5 years of his life. And it's kind of weird to think that even as late as 1911, this was not an incredibly famous image. This was not at all protected by bulletproof glass today or, you know, much of a security system. This was just hanging on a wall like other paintings were, but this theft definitely made it famous. And there were even rumors that Picasso had been involved with the theft. But I'll tell you, my favorite art thief that I found is Stefan Breitweiser. He was a waiter and he began stealing art objects in the spring of 1995. And he would steal anything he could: drawings, paintings, illuminated manuscripts, sculptures, silverware, and ivory carvings. By the time he's caught, he had stolen 239 objects from 172 different venues. And this is why I like him so much. At his trial, he says that it became a compulsion. I wanted more and more, and I couldn't stop myself. I needed these objects, and they needed me. The most expensive painting he stole was on his 25th birthday. And this is a painting that's valued at about $9 million. He would, like most art thieves, cut these paintings from the frame on the wall. And down the street from where he lived, there was a carpenter who would make him new frames. Not once did the carpenter ever ask, where are you getting these paintings from? He lived at home with his mother, and in his bedroom, he would have his walls filled with artwork. And once the walls were full, he would start having rotating exhibitions. When he was caught, his girlfriend calls the mother and says that the police are headed to their house. And she does what any good mother would do for helping her son. She starts to destroy the evidence. By the time she's caught, she had destroyed 60 artworks, including this painting by Boucher, which she was caught shoving down the garbage disposal. Breitweiser ends up serving 26 months in jail. Both his mother and girlfriend receive 18-month prison sentences. When he gets out, he writes Confessions of an Art Thief. Where is he today? He's back in jail. And this is not the first time, but the second time since his original arrest. So this guy just can't learn not to steal art. But this is when we know who the thief is. A lot of times we don't. In spring of 2001, this painting, which is a study for another work, and the artist here is Marc Chagall. This work was stolen from the Jewish Museum of New York. A year later, it turns up in a postal sorting station in Topeka, Kansas. The value of this painting, $1 million. The screen was stolen in February of 1994 from the National Gallery in Oslo. This is also stolen on the day of the opening Olympics in Oslo. So everyone was at the Olympics, no one paying attention to the museum. The thieves, they left a note in its place saying, thanks for the poor security. The painting was recovered 9 months later in November of 1994. Now, a lot of people don't know there's actually 4 different versions of the scream. A decade later from the first theft, we have this version of the scream stolen. In August 2004, the thieves also stole this work, which is Munch's version of the Madonna. These paintings were taken by thieves who were caught on camera. The person in the far rear there to the left, he actually drops the Madonna twice heading to their black Audi station wagon. The security guards at the museum were interviewed by reporters at the time, and they even said that these were the clumsiest thieves that they had ever seen. These paintings were recovered 2 years later, but as you notice in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, we have irreversible water damage. On the right-hand side of the Madonna, some rips and tears. This is a painting that we attribute to Leonardo da Vinci. It's called Madonna with the Yarn Winder, and it's valued at $65 million. And it was in a castle up in Drumlanrig, Scotland. And just like in the movies, there were a couple people taking the castle tour, grabbed the painting off the wall, jumped out of a window, ran across the castle grounds, and disappeared. 4 years later, it winds up in a locker in a train station in Glasgow. But we are fortunate because those paintings have been found and recovered. There's a lot of paintings that are still missing. For instance, Luxembourg Gardens by Matisse. One of my favorite painters, Jean-Laurent Gérôme, his painting Pool in the Harem, valued at $1 million, also missing. The Vanderbilt murals, $2 million each. Andrew Wyeth's Moon Madness, this painting's worth $3 million. Henry Moore's Reclining Figure. Now this is really a spectacular art theft. The thieves stole this from the grounds of the artist. This is on the artist's estate where this picture is taken. The thieves not only stole the sculpture, they stole the flatbed in order to steal the sculpture. Most likely, it's been melted down for scrap metal. The value on this work, $5.6 million. One of my favorite paintings, Audrey's White Duck, valued at $8.8 million. Caravaggio's Nativity Scene, this work is valued at $20 million. Rembrandt, Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only seascape. Vermeer's The Concert. Vermeer only completed around 37 paintings. This is also a priceless painting. And Edward Manet's Chez Tortoni. This is from the father of modern art. This is also a priceless work. And you may have noticed that these last three paintings, Chez Tortoni, The Concert, and Storm on the Sea of Galilee, were all stolen on the same day. March 18th, 1990 was the largest heist of artwork on American soil. And it took place in Boston at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. This is, what happened here, I should say, was that in the middle of the night, two police officers showed up to the museum, and the night security guards, and there were two of them, let them in. They were not real police officers. They handcuffed the night security guards to pipes down in the basement. And for the next 81 minutes, they walked around the museum and they took 13 works of art. And when you think about an art theft, normally like the one that we just had in Amsterdam, is a smash and grab robbery. Get in and get out. These guys went on a shopping spree. It was literally an hour and a half that they perused this museum to take these 13 works. The value of them together, insurance-wise, is $500 million. All of these paintings are still missing, and it's been 30 years. There is still that $5 million reward, and the FBI occasionally says we have tips and we have an idea of who stole it and we're getting close. But again, none of these paintings have surfaced, and it's been 30 years now. You can do further exploration on the Gardner Museum itself. The Gardner Heist book at the left is a fantastic book. It has a chapter for each of the artworks that were stolen. We've got these two books as well, Museum of the Missing and Loot. Sharon Waxman wrote for The New Yorker. We also have The Rape of Europa, which was first an award-winning book in 1994, followed by the documentary in 2007. If you're interested in The Monuments Men, there is a fantastic movie out. It is very Hollywood, and you can see some grade A actors are in it. It's about 85% true. There is some Hollywood magic in there, but for the most part, it definitely gets the story and the facts correct. and also The Woman in Gold, again, a Hollywood blockbuster uh, movie as far as actors go, again, about 85% true and accurate. And if you like listening to podcasts, the Last Scene podcast is focused exactly on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and it's definitely worth the listen. And with that, that's where I'd like to stop my my lecture.
Hey, Dave, thank you so much for a fascinating talk. That was really great. My first burning question is, can people still view Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer today?
They can, not during our quarantine though.
Okay.
It is in America. The same person who I had mentioned in the lecture, Ron Lauder, he still owns the painting. And he has it in a gallery he's associated with called the New Gallery. And it's in New York. It's somewhere in the museum row there, but it is viewable, yes.
Okay, so that's good, because a lot of, if it's off, some of the tragedy of art transfer and of course art theft is that the public no longer gets to enjoy these treasures, these worldwide cultural treasures.
That's so true. And I feel very lucky to have worked in a museum. And I also feel now very bad that I have, because when you go to any museum, first of all, only about 3 to 5% of their holdings are on display. That means that 95% of their work is in the storage facilities that they have. And it is, I was so spoiled being able to go through the storage facilities at the LA County Museum of Art and see works that had never seen the light of day on a wall. And even one of my friends owned a Jackson Pollock painting, and I got to go to a private showing of that work in an art warehouse. And again, they had a whole bunch of works there that were owned by individuals, but they're in storage. They're in storage for, of course, protection and preservation and such. But it's sad how many artworks are not viewable.
Dave, kind of going off of that, you mentioned obviously you've worked in a museum. Going off of a little bit of what you talked about, do you think art museums are well enough protected?
I don't think anything could be well enough protected. If there's someone who wants to steal something, they're going to steal it. I do think we have a great amount of security, but when you walk through museums such as in Southern California, we have the Getty and the Norton Simon and the LA County Museum of Art. Those individuals are just kind of there telling you, make sure you don't get too close to the paintings and such. They're not armed with guns or anything like that. There are other types of security that are in museums, but for the most part, I just don't think that they are.
Especially during this time too of COVID.
Yes, yes.
Related to, obviously going off of your topic here, do you have a favorite art heist or art thief? Not that you necessarily admire them, but.
Yeah. I love the story of Stefan Breitweiser and how he's just so addicted to stealing art, and he needs them, and he needs to steal these artworks. And I always found that fascinating. I do want to study a little bit more of the Mona Lisa art heist, because I think that's fascinating, and especially the implication of Picasso at the time, because when we look back in history, this is the guy who's changing the way we view art. And he's just created abstraction, and he's just created the movement of Cubism. So the idea of this new type of art challenging very historical works such as Da Vinci's Mona Lisa is quite intriguing.
Great.
So Dave, just another question. What led your interest to art theft?
Well, I don't partake in it, and I don't condone it. I don't suggest you get involved with it, but I think it's a fascinating topic. And I think that early on, it was very much romanticized in movies like the Thomas Crown Affair. There is something about it that intrigues us. And when you start to envelop the idea of the money involved with these artworks, and even more so today, we're starting to shift away from how important the money is to how important these works are culturally, as we saw with the portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer. It is something that when we look, for me as a teacher, you know, I teach a broad variety of classes, and many of my students are non-art majors. So that's kind of why I really pursued this topic, is because not only was it interesting to me, it was interesting to my students as well. And so many of my students at the end of the day, whether it's the end of the lecture or it's the end of the semester, they tell me that this was their favorite one, that it really intrigued them, because it's not only, as I mentioned, the money standpoint and the cultural standpoint. A lot of people can bring in their majors to this idea of art theft.
I guess, Dave, final question here. If you could have any painting from any time hanging on your wall, what would you want there to be?
Well, I hate to say this because I've already spotted it at the LA County Museum of Art. And I figured if I was there during an earthquake and the buildings collapsed, I would take this and keep it for my very own. It's a painting by Chardin, and it's Boy Blowing a Bubble, and there's 3 of them. One of them's in LACMA, one of them's in the Louvre, and I think the other's in the National Gallery in London. But it's just one of those paintings that I always loved, walking through the galleries going, yeah, that's someday that's going to be mine, when you know, the best I'm going to have is a print of it. So
How
that's
fun.
my favorite. If it disappears, you don't know me.
We never heard.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you again for your lecture. And Laura, thank you for setting this up.
Oh, my pleasure.